probing a community-based conversational storytelling agent to document digital stories of housing insecurity. I'm Brett Halperin, and this is a work that I did with my co-authors Hsieh, Erin, McElroy, James Pierce, and Daniela Rosner. So this project was really born out of immersion in the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, which is a digital cartography, data visualization, and multimedia storytelling collective with chapters primarily in the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, and New York City, where I first got involved when I was living there at the onset of COVID. And when 30 to 40 million residents were at risk of eviction in the US alone, we started to document people's stories of eviction and housing insecurity throughout the pandemic. And I joined the collective to design this map that you see here. And working in this grassroots volunteer-based context that is very scrappy, very low resourced, we struggled to really sustain this work over time because volunteers would come in and out. We would have to train new people. People were dropping out because they were burning out or grieving or getting sick. But at the same time, we were told that this work was really important. And so we wanted to explore ways of sustaining and increasing access to storytelling. And so we started to probe the possibility of AI support. And this question emerged around what values, hopes, and fears do people express about AI through the design of a conversational storytelling agent for housing justice. And so with this question, we expand prior work related to conversational storytelling agents, which we call CSAs for short, as well as community-based documentary work. So we did a community-based design study where we interviewed 17 people, 5 narrators or people who had experienced housing insecurity, 4 story collectors, which are people like oral historians and documentary filmmakers who document the stories, and then 8 collectors/narrators, which are people who had dual perspective because maybe they shared their story at one point and then started getting involved in documenting other stories. And it sort of is this movement building mutual aid type mechanism. And the narrators had a wide range of housing insecurity experiences, such as displacement, eviction, landlord abuse, harassment, etc. And I had been working with the collective for 3 years now. And so I recruited mostly through them, or people in them and people whom I knew. And I'd worked with Habitat for Humanity before that, building homes. And so I recruited through those partnerships as well. And I designed these 2 visual mockups that you see here, which are 2 different designs of the CSA in terms of the interface. One is a more inventive aesthetic, and one is a bit more traditional, recognizable chatbot messenger. I also mocked it up in English and Spanish because I know that language barriers can often be a complication in this space. And so we showed these mockups to people, asked them what they thought about it. With the collectors, we also want to understand their existing practices to figure out how CSA might fit into or complicate them. And we also did a storytelling simulation with the narrators through Wizard of Oz prototyping, where we used a simple text file to write questions and then they would respond out loud. Then we analyzed the interview transcripts with thematic analysis and close reading. So here's a sample story documented with the CSA probe, and I want to note that housing insecurity does not affect all groups or identities equally. There are certain groups that are far more prone to housing insecurity, and we were very conscious of that in recruiting people who had intersectional identities along axes of race, gender, class, etc. And so this person here identified as white, but also LGBTQIA+, non-binary, disabled, low income, formerly incarcerated, and had a baby during a pandemic eviction. And so this person's story reads as follows. I went from barely being able to afford rent to definitely not being able to afford rent. My landlord was extremely wealthy, and he tried to make me feel bad, saying my efforts in organizing against the eviction was going to be futile, trying to make working class person feel bad for them losing thousands of dollars when I haven't seen thousands of dollars. I worked so hard to give 90% of my income to housing. The minimum wage hasn't been raised and nothing else has changed that would make it more possible for anybody to pay more in rent. Housing for felons and people with low credit is almost impossible. That's not something I foresaw when I was convicted. So this narrative is based in the San Francisco Bay Area, where housing has been increasingly unaffordable as technology companies have, really come in and grown and increased the costs. And what we see from this story is just the intersecting precarities and the forms of discrimination and different class-based forms of oppression that make housing so unobtainable, and just how policies are really insufficient, and why it's important to document these stories to elevate the nuances. So here's an overview of the findings, which kind of break into these 3 sub-questions and then sub-points, and we'll explore one sub-point from each sub-question just for sake of time. So first, how do collectors encounter the storytelling process with and without the CSA? This particular point focuses on without the CSA. In talking to collectors, we learned the great importance of addressing positionality and rapport. Many of the collectors are oral historians who do oral history interviews with interviewees who they refer to as narrators to denote that as their story. And because of this interviewing type process, this is why we wanted to explore a conversational storytelling agent to facilitate conversational interactions as well. And we learned, though, that the way collectors do this is that they provide guidance and they work to facilitate it and offer emotional support, but not control the narrative in any way. They're really there to actively listen, ask follow-up questions, physically witness the narrator's story grounded in place-based relations. Maybe they're in the same city or same neighborhood, and they work to build a relationship with the narrator that is not just transactional, but really about a form of mutual aid or friendship. And they inquire about the narrator's social support needs and offer resources to support them after the storytelling, because they're really looking at them holistically, not just as a storyteller, but also as a tenant or resident and person and friend. How do narrators encounter the storytelling process with and without the CSA? Well, this next point looks at with the CSA. In prior work, particularly in a study by Park and Lee, we see that a conversational agent can alleviate self-disclosure burdens. And we see a similar sort of storytelling burdens for narrators that the CSA can sort of alleviate in relation to anxiety, fear, shame, and time expenditure. We see that there can be a lot of shame associated with experiences of housing insecurity. And as one narrator said, I can think of cases where I might not have the capacity to speak to a human, but this feels better. Other narrators spoke to how it can offer a totally anonymous storytelling experience where they don't have to disclose their identity to even a single person, which can be appealing for those who are hesitant because they fear landlord retaliation. We also see that CSA can be less burdensome in sort of how it can circumnavigate time constraints by not only offering a shorter form storytelling option, but also eliminating the back and forth coordination hurdles and friction where many narrators drop off because finding a scheduling time can be difficult. And it can also be difficult with time zone differences. And we also see that the CSA can alleviate different social anxieties. As one narrator said, I didn't have stage fright from talking to a human. And another narrator said, I would choose a robot over a random human because humans are going to have their own judgments and thoughts about your experience. And so to have that in the back of my mind, I think would be a bit distracting. So we see opportunity to bring in other narrators who might not otherwise participate because they might feel uncomfortable. And other parts of our paper talk about how it can offer a cathartic experience as well as potentially support other languages that other human collectors might not be able to offer. And so I would point you to those aspects in the paper as well. But with that said, a CSA also complicates story documentation, and largely because of the negative associations of AI and automation. Participants relay negative perceptions and experiences with other conversational systems, often describing them as annoying, dismissive, invasive, deceptive. For example, one narrator said, I'll call my corporate landlord and have to dial a number talking to a robot, and to me, it's just annoying. Let me just talk to a person and fix my problem. Similarly, another person described how it can be quite literally dehumanizing other conversational systems in housing contexts, saying, if you're a tenant, you're already dealing with so much dehumanization, especially if you're using a big property management company, you're used to all this automated profanity. And from the collector point of view, there was this anxiety about it replacing and displacing humans. One older collector said, can a robot really replace me as the interviewer? I have a little bit of a knee-jerk anti-automation thing. People are losing their jobs because everything's being automated, but in this situation, it's like the opposite because there's not enough of us. So we see these really complicated feelings around the fact that, on one hand, there's all these negative associations, but on the other hand, people really recognize the benefits, particularly in these low-resource grassroots contexts where it's like, we need all the help that we can get. And so one way we found around this is that the more inventive aesthetic design was one way that people felt like it disassociated from the more standard recognizable chatbots, which they viewed unfavorably. So a few discussion points come out of this. One is the shifting role and character of documentary methods for HCI. We see that on one hand, a CSA may expand our means of storytelling in meaningful ways, but it might also foreclose human connections. Similarly, we see tensions in storytelling at greater scales. It might increase access to storytelling, but it also might delocalize stories from action or on-the-ground organizing. It might banish meaningful diversity in terms of how the process can be customized or tailored to people, and it might even undermine other grassroots work. So what we call for is this notion of adjacent mediation inspired by Campton, Perez, Bustos to think about how CSA support beyond human-in-the-loop concepts that reify the raciality of automation might work in this context. And we see that it makes person-to-person activities more important to really do the stories justice and to listen and to hear what the narrators are saying. So in conclusion, while CSA can help elevate crucial voices, it is important to never abandon traditional oral history and storytelling practices which at the end of the day cannot and should not be reduced to digital mediation.